I don't talk about this a lot because it's not one of my big priorities. The size of this YouTube channel that I've got, it's just I want to be beneficial to that small group of people out there that are interested. But every once in a while, I am pleased to log on to my YouTube channel and find out that I've doubled in size of subscriptions again. So if you remember, we started with like 20 and we went to 40 and we went to 80 and then we crossed 100 and now we have crossed 200. Some of the videos have been huge. I never imagined that I would put together a YouTube video that hit over 100,000 people. Um, I do two types: a weekly devotion, which is a bit smaller. It's an inspirational meditation, usually on Wednesdays. And then I do one that's kind of haphazard, just whenever I get around to it, that usually is a nature video. And I'll have to say the nature one brings in more people than the inspirational one, but I'm pleased. It's been a cold, snowy week. And then it gets warm and the snow melts off. And then it gets cold and the snow all comes back on again. And then for the last couple of days, it's melted off. And today it's getting cold. Tomorrow the snow's coming back. So it's the last gasps of winter. But it's going to be a long gasp, it looks like. Well, this is a weekly devotion from the Littleton United Methodist Church. For the past few Wednesdays, I've been taking my meditation. I've been inspired by the writings of John of the Cross, a medieval mystic who wrote about the dark night of the soul. And I listed several of his. The dark night, by the way, is not depression. I'm not qualified to talk about depression. Uh, I'm not a counselor or anything like that. These are things that most of us, many of us, go through, and there are times when it seems like God just isn't there, and when we feel down and melancholy and alienated from God and from everybody around us, and these are times especially that God really is closer than we think. And it turns out that we look back on retrospect and often find out God was there all the time, and that was one of our major growing times as a Christian. Well, we talked about a dark night of us trying to run our own lives and digging our own hole and getting in over our head and having to cry out to God and reach up, and maybe we talked about salvation, or we talked about the dark night of when we started becoming religious and excited about religious things, and we read the Bible and we sing the hymns and we do certain types of prayer and we get into a regimen that helps us to grow. But after a while, sometimes there's a temptation for us to substitute a real relationship with Christ to the rules and the trappings of religion. A lot of us go through that. Maybe a time of digging deeper in our growth. We talked about, the third time we talked about a dark night that is none of our making. It could be illness. It could be reverses. It could be many things that just knock us right off our feet. And we need God, and we don't feel God, and we go through a dark valley, a transition in our lives, and God is there in the transition times and in those low times. But there is danger that sometimes we grow closer to God in those times. Sometimes we turn our backs on God. And then the last dark night that we talked about from John of the Cross is when we look so intently at Christ. This is a very good dark night that all the world seems to fade around us. It's like if you look at the brightness of the sun for too long, then you start to become blind. And this is, you know, growing close in that love relationship with Christ. Well, when we were done, I packed that all away and started to stick my book away and, started to think about going on to other things. And then it dawned on me there were a couple of dark nights that we did not talk about that probably we should. So if you will put up with me kind of being gloomy for a little bit longer, I want to share with you a couple of more dark nights that happened to many of us and what we can do about it. Okay, I want to talk about a scenario that happens to a lot of us at times. Let's say we have a year when we realize that life is finite, that we're going to die. And we look at our lives and we realize that we're not getting any younger and that we may be closer to the grave than we were to birth. And we look at our lives and they're not panning out quite like we thought they would when we were young, when we had big dreams and we were going to tackle the world. It could be that you imagined yourself by this time in life either in a larger home or headed toward a larger home or a nicer career than what it turned out to be. It may be that your marriage didn't turn out the way you thought your marriage was going to turn out. It may be that you have an altruistic streak and you were going to tackle the wrongs of the world and they're still there. Well, let's be really gloomy for a minute. When your parents were born, racism was a big thing. When you were born, racism is a big thing. When you die, racism will be a big thing. And probably when your children die, racism will be a big thing. When your parents were born, war was an ever-present danger. When you were born, war was an ever-present danger. When you die, war is going to be an ever-present danger. When your children die, war is probably going to be an ever-present danger. When your parents were born, there was poverty as a major problem. When you were born, poverty was a problem. When you die, poverty is going to be a problem in this world. And when your kids die, poverty is going to be a problem. And I could just go on and on and on. You know that I could. What I'm saying is that we hit this world to make a difference, and we probably aren't making the difference that we thought we were going to make. And we hit this world with dreams of what the future is going to be. They lived happily ever after, and ever after doesn't look like it does in the fairy tales. We call this existential angst. That is kind of a deep sadness whenever we think about it. And I think it happens more maybe within people that are a little contemplative and that are more internally focused than it does, people that are just not paying attention around them. But if we look deep, we see that the problem of evil and pain and poverty and all those sorts of things and war and those things are part of the human condition and have been and will be, and nothing that you and I are going to do are probably going to make that big of a difference. Existential angst. Oh, and what do you do about it? Because it can be crippling. Well, first, let me say what you don't do about it. You don't get angry at the world. I see a lot of people do that, and I see a lot of young idealistic people do that, and I see a lot of older once idealistic people did that, and they know everything wrong with the church, they know everything wrong with the government, they know everything wrong with the world, they know everything wrong with everything. They're not being part of a solution, but they're calling out the wrong. It's sort of an inner anger response to that existential angst. It's saying the world's broken. There's something wrong with it, and but it's not fixing it. So you don't get angry at the whole world. The other thing you don't do about it is you don't check out. You don't become a hermit. You don't just disappear from the rest of the world and stick your head in the sand and just quit being a part of everything. Neither do you change your goals in life and decide to live for yourself. I mean, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may all die. And you're not making a big difference, and nobody's making a big difference. The only difference you can make is for yourself, and you become a very selfish person, thinking that that's enlightened because nothing's worth living, because nothing's going to change, and we're all going to die. That's that's just not a good way to face it. Although anger, separation, isolation, selfishness, those are all ways people do face the angst that comes from knowing that your life is finite and your ability to make a lot of difference is also finite. And let me get all radical and extreme here for a minute. Let me get all scary, okay? Um, Here's what probably won't agree with me, and these Wednesdays are just for the purpose. These Wednesday inspirational thoughts and devotions are for the purpose of getting us to think. So you don't have to do this, but think about it. Okay? Why don't you just give up your dreams? What you plan for your life? What you envision yourself being in 5 years, in 10 years. I know that planning for the future, everybody tells us we need to plan 5 years at a time, 10 years at a time. Where do you see yourself at 5 years from now or 10? Maybe just let go of that and realize that's sort of in God's hands. While you're at it, why don't you let go of your scales? We have like a set of balances in our head, and it tells us that one job is better than another job. One income is better than another income. A 2,000 square foot house is better than a 1,000 square foot house, but not as good as a 3,000 square foot house. Just let it go. Doesn't matter if it's a mansion or a shack. It doesn't matter if you are doing manual work or if you are a CEO of a corporation. I mean, nothing you're going to do is going to matter that much in the world anyway, for most of us. I mean, but even those of you that do something outstanding and you invent something new and it changes everything, a few years after you die, nobody's going to remember you. They may remember what you did, but they're not going to think about it. Why don't you just let all of that go? And in exchange for all that stuff that's just not going to last anyway, why don't you exchange it for something that will last and that will never run out and never wear out? That is, instead of planning that my career is going to be here in 5 years, my career is going to be here in 10 years. And, I teach in the college. I hear students all the time, I'm going to be a Supreme Court justice, or I'm going to be a nuclear physicist, or I'm going to be, I'm going to be dedicated totally to God. I'm going to search for the wisest decisions that come along each time and search for God's will in the way I live my life. I'm not going to care if I'm poor or if I'm rich. I'm going to care if I'm godly, in tune with God's will for my life, and that whenever I get done with this life and everything is all done, that I hear the voice of Christ say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." The voice of God. and then I enter eternity with him. Why don't you live for relationship? Relationship with Christ, relationship with your spouse, relationships with your family. Why don't you let one day unfold into another day and another day? What would keep us, of course, is thinking that we really need to have control because God's not able to, that God's just sort of a pipe dream out there someplace in our imagination to make us feel comfortable during dark times. But God is real, and God is active, and God can lead and direct your life. So, and also, as you do things during the day, like if I'm preaching to a crowd of 500 or if I'm preaching to a crowd of 5, well, maybe it doesn't matter. But what matters is that what I'm sharing is an act of worship. And whether you are a captain of industry or whether you are, a copy person, a gopher that goes from, carrying stuff around to people that are captains of industry, maybe it doesn't matter as long as you do it as an act of worship and it's where God wants you to be. And then that last stretch of your life, it can be sweet. We just sort of have our measuring sticks up against the wrong items. As you enter the rest of this week, may grace and peace go with you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ.